In 1897, Victorian London buzzed with curiosity, fear, and gossip. But nothing captivated the city, like the trial of Eleanor Blackwell. She was a woman unlike any other, accused of crimes that puzzled both the law and the scientists of her time. Witnesses said she could make people obey her with just a look or a few words, as if her presence alone held power over their minds. Some believed it was a natural gift, others whispered of something darker, possession, curses, or even divine punishment. Eleanor's story instantly became a mirror for the anxieties of her age, innocence clashing with suspicion, logic versus superstition, morality against manipulation. Newspapers printed sensational stories. Some called her a mastermind, others painted her as a victim of circumstance, a woman punished simply for being extraordinary. Doctors and psychologists tried to measure her effect, yet no explanation satisfied anyone. Clergy debated her soul, while the poor and wealthy alike felt unsettled in her presence. There was something about Eleanor that went beyond charm or intelligence. It was uncanny, almost frightening, yet undeniably magnetic. People could not look away. Even as a child, Eleanor had shown unusual abilities. She read moods, predicted actions, and seemed to influence the people around her without effort. These traits only grew more pronounced with age, turning curiosity into fear. Her life exposed the power dynamics of a society struggling to contain. A woman who refused to be ordinary. Victorian England, with its strict rules and expectations, could not easily categorize her. To some, she was a genius. To others, she was dangerous. To everyone, she was unforgettable. What makes Eleanor so fascinating even today is that no one can truly explain her. Was she a clever manipulator who used her intelligence to control others? Was she a victim of fear and misunderstanding, punished by society for her talents? Or was there something else entirely, a force or gift that we still cannot comprehend? The mystery of Eleanor Blackwell sits at the crossroads of science, psychology, and folklore, reminding us that some people defy explanation. Tonight, we step into Eleanor's world, a world where charm can be terrifying, where intelligence can become a weapon, and where society's fears turn a woman into a legend. We will explore the life, the trial, and the lasting questions that make Eleanor Blackwell one of the most haunting figures of Victorian London. Some call her a criminal, some a genius, some a mystery. But perhaps the truth, like Eleanor herself, is impossible to fully grasp. Eleanor Blackwell entered the world in 1879 in the narrow, soot-choked streets of East London, a city teeming with industry, poverty, and the restless hum of human ambition. From the outset, she was not like other children. Her eyes, sharp and unusually observant, seemed to register the slightest emotional tremor, the subtlest shift in tone or posture. And in her presence, adults and children alike often felt as though their thoughts were suddenly exposed. Diaries kept by neighbors years later recalled Eleanor as a child both charming and unsettling, capable of eliciting smiles and warmth one moment and silent, calculating stillness the next. While most children her age delighted in games or mischief, Eleanor's focus often lingered on adults, observing their habits, predicting their actions, and responding with a maturity beyond her years. Even her parents, though loving, sometimes found her unnerving, commenting in letters that she seemed to know too much too soon, and that her understanding of human behavior was unsettlingly accurate. From an early age, Eleanor exhibited what some modern psychologists would now describe as extraordinary social intelligence, a perceptiveness that bordered on clairvoyance. She could sense fear, guilt, and desire in ways that seemed inexplicable, almost preternatural. While her peers stumbled through missteps, Eleanor navigated complex social dynamics with ease. She noticed subtle cues, a twitch of an eye, a hesitation in speech, and responded in ways that guided the behavior of those around her. Teachers remarked that she appeared to predict questions before they were asked, and that she could influence classmates to act in ways that served her unspoken intentions. Letters preserved from her schooling reveal a girl who was polite and seemingly innocent, yet whose notes often reveal meticulous observation of her environment and the people within it. She chronicled behaviors, patterns, and reactions with precision, as though cataloging human nature itself. Contrasts defined Eleanor's early life in ways both ordinary and extraordinary. On one hand, she was a child, enjoying stories, sweets, and moments of laughter. On the other, her abilities raised questions. Was this simple precocity, or something more sinister? In a society that rigidly categorized women, childhood innocence was expected, yet Eleanor's emerging talents complicated these notions. Victorian. London demanded conformity, but Eleanor's intellect and social acuity constantly challenged boundaries. Her keen awareness of authority figures and her ability to manipulate situations, even subtly, led some family friends to whisper of unnatural aptitude, while others simply admired her intelligence. Even as a young girl, she demonstrated a capacity to shape perception, bending minor social situations to her advantage, a skill that would later terrify, fascinate, and confound adults trained in the most sophisticated sciences of behavior. The environment in which Eleanor grew up amplified these qualities. East London in the late 19th century was a crucible of societal pressure and stark inequality. Poverty pressed against the working-class families, while the expectations of propriety, particularly for young women, enforced rigid behavioral norms. In this climate, Eleanor's abilities could not remain unnoticed. Her family's modest home was suffused with the anxiety of survival and social appearance. Yet within this tension, Eleanor's talents found fertile ground. She learned quickly to navigate contradictions, to speak with politeness while asserting influence, to smile while assessing intentions, and to appear deferential while subtly guiding outcomes. Observers noted a duality in her character, a combination of charm and precision, empathy and calculation, curiosity and control. Such contrasts would define her life and eventually frame the moral panic that would surround her trial decades later. Scholars and historians analyzing Eleanor's early years have debated the sources of her abilities. Some suggest a rare neurological or psychological condition heightened her perception, granting her a level of insight into human behavior that bordered on the uncanny. Others propose that her environment, with its pressures, inequalities, and social strictures, honed her skills, forcing her to develop a heightened awareness as a survival mechanism. Letters from distant relatives indicate that Eleanor's intellect and charisma were evident even at gatherings where children were expected to be quiet, obedient, and unseen. She engaged adults with an intensity that both charmed and disarmed, asking questions that revealed hidden anxieties or secrets. Her contemporaries could not easily categorize her. She did not fit neatly into the accepted roles for girls of her age, leading to whispers of unnatural talent, foreshadowing the sensational accounts that would later dominate the public imagination. Eleanor's formative years were punctuated by moments that illustrate the duality at the heart of her life. She would comfort peers with a seemingly innate empathy, yet simultaneously exploit weaknesses when the opportunity arose. She demonstrated both genuine kindness and manipulative precision. These contradictions, innocence intertwined with the perception of manipulation, created unease in those around her. Teachers, neighbors, and family members all recorded instances in which Eleanor appeared to predict decisions or uncover hidden motives, leaving adults unsettled. Clergy occasionally commented on her presence in sermons or church gatherings, noting an unusual influence over others. Congregants were described as unusually responsive to her comments, or as displaying emotions triggered not by words alone, but by her gaze and subtle gestures. In a society sensitive to moral propriety and spiritual authority, such abilities were unsettling, leading to speculation and fear even among educated observers. The social consequences of Eleanor's talents were profound. As she matured, her precociousness evolved into deliberate influence. Friends and acquaintances observed that she could charm adults into revealing information, sway opinions in her favor, or diffuse tensions with subtle language and gestures. This ability did not go unnoticed. Peers began to both admire and fear her, and the duality of her presence, innocent yet controlling, became increasingly pronounced. The tension between her natural innocence and the perception of her abilities as manipulative presaged the public reaction to her trial decades later. where these qualities would be interpreted through the lenses of fear, superstition, and emerging psychological science. Eleanor's childhood also offers insight into the moral and philosophical dimensions that would later define debates about her life. Her early awareness of human motives and emotions, combined with her capacity to influence them, challenges fundamental questions. Does understanding another's psychology confer moral responsibility? Is influence inherently corrupting, or is it a neutral skill shaped by intent? In Victorian England, a society preoccupied with female virtue and social order, Eleanor's abilities struck at anxieties about power, autonomy, and gender roles. The same qualities that enabled her survival and success in childhood, perceptiveness, intuition, charisma, would later be recast as dangerous, unnatural, or even sinister in the sensationalized accounts that surrounded her trial. Throughout these early years, Eleanor's life was framed by contrasts that would define her legacy: the ordinary and the extraordinary, innocence and manipulation, curiosity and calculation, societal expectation and personal autonomy. Her upbringing, environment, and innate abilities combined to create a figure whose existence defied easy categorization. By examining her origins in this light, it becomes clear that Eleanor Blackwell was a product of both circumstance and inherent talent, poised from childhood to challenge the boundaries of perception, morality, and fear. She emerged not merely as a remarkable individual, but as a symbol of the tension between human potential and societal expectation, a tension that would reach its climax in the courtroom decades later, drawing science, law, and superstition into an impossible, haunting entanglement. Eleanor Blackwell's origins illuminate the forces, both internal and external, that shaped her life. Her exceptional intellect and empathy, intertwined with societal constraint and expectation, set the stage for the events that would later confound London. The duality of her existence, innocence shadowed by potential manipulation, natural aptitude tinged with suspicion, created fertile ground for legend, moral panic, and the eventual trial that would cement her place in history. In tracing her early years, we see the convergence of nurture, nature, environment, and perception, revealing a life that was always extraordinary, always observed, and always feared, and a childhood that laid the foundation for the haunting, unresolved legacy she would leave behind. By the mid-1890s, Eleanor Blackwell had entered her 20s, a period in which her reputation, already tinged with fascination and unease, began to attract both admiration and intense suspicion. Accounts from contemporaries suggest she moved through London society with an uncanny ability to influence outcomes, steering conversations, decisions, and even the emotions of those around her. Some claimed that Eleanor could extract secrets from the most guarded individuals, seemingly without coercion, while others alleged that she manipulated men and women into acts that bordered on ruin. Reports circulated of gentlemen losing fortunes after consulting with her, and of confessions revealed that no one had willingly offered. Victorian London, with its rigid social codes and pervasive moral anxiety, struggled to categorize her behavior, vacillating between admiration for her intellect and fear of her power. The accusations against Eleanor were as varied as they were sensational. In financial circles, rumors suggested she had a hand in orchestrating speculative schemes that benefited her associates while leaving others bankrupt. Letters from aggrieved individuals, preserved in court records, described interactions in which Eleanor's calm interrogation or subtle persuasion led them to disclose confidential information or agree to decisions they would later regret. To skeptics, these were simply cases of misjudgment or the social naivete of victims encountering an exceptionally intelligent woman. To others, her actions seemed almost preternatural, her presence exerting a force beyond rational explanation. Clergy and moralists framed her abilities in spiritual terms. Some whispered that she was touched by divine insight, while others feared she was under the influence of demonic forces. The contrast between secular explanation and supernatural interpretation fueled public debate, making her a figure simultaneously respected, feared, and reviled. Victorian anxieties surrounding gender intensified the perception of Eleanor's influence as dangerous. Women were expected to conform to strict social norms, quiet, obedient, and morally upright. Eleanor's charisma and ability to exert control over situations subverted these expectations, prompting whispers of manipulation and moral corruption. Gentlemen who found themselves unwittingly disclosing secrets or making choices against their best interests often struggled to reconcile their experiences with contemporary notions of female propriety. Diaries from the period reveal a mixture of awe and fear, as observers struggled to understand whether Eleanor's abilities represented natural intellect, learned skill, or an unnatural capacity for influence. In this environment, the line between brilliance and threat blurred, and Eleanor's actions were scrutinized under a moral microscope that few men or women would have survived unscathed. The press played a pivotal role in shaping public perception. Newspapers published lurid stories, often exaggerating details to captivate readers. Headlines proclaimed that Eleanor bent men to her will, or revealed secrets no mortal should know, framing her as both a prodigy and a predator. Reporters interviewed witnesses whose accounts were contradictory, further amplifying the mystery surrounding her behavior. In small print, some articles reported rational explanations, noting the influence of observation, social skills, and psychological insight. Yet the sensational headlines dominated public consciousness, framing Eleanor as an almost mythic figure whose power exceeded ordinary understanding. By the time authorities became aware of the allegations, her reputation had already become a cultural phenomenon, with opinion divided between belief in her supernatural abilities and skepticism rooted in science and reason. Authorities' investigations into Eleanor's alleged crimes were complicated by her ability to navigate social and legal boundaries with skill. Arrest warrants and court filings describe incidents in which she allegedly compelled confessions, negotiated contracts, or influenced decisions in ways that left her contemporaries both amazed and unsettled. Yet despite these claims, concrete evidence was often difficult to obtain. Victims were reluctant to testify, either out of embarrassment or the inexplicable conviction that Eleanor's influence had guided their own actions. Some investigators speculated that the very perception of power could enhance its effects. Those who believed Eleanor could manipulate them were more susceptible to suggestion, creating a feedback loop in which social fear reinforced actual behavioral compliance. In this sense, the boundary between reality and perception became perilously thin. The societal stakes of Eleanor's alleged actions extended beyond individual misdeeds. Her ability to influence people threatened established hierarchies and moral codes. She exposed latent fears about autonomy, gender, and morality, forcing a society obsessed with control to confront the limits of its understanding. Psychologists, philosophers, and physicians debated the mechanisms underlying her influence. Was it merely intelligence, keen observation, and social intuition? Or did Eleanor possess a form of psychological power not yet codified by science? These discussions illuminated the broader Victorian struggle to reconcile scientific rationalism with a world still steeped in superstition, religion, and moral certainty. Testimonies collected during preliminary investigations reveal a mixture of fear, admiration, and bewilderment. Some witnesses described Eleanor's influence in almost tactile terms. Her gaze or tone seemed to extract truths previously hidden, to unsettle even the most composed individuals, and to bend decisions. Without physical coercion, others framed her as a calculating manipulator, exploiting social norms and personal weaknesses for her own gain. These contrasting narratives exemplify the tension between empirical observation and subjective interpretation, between the letter of the law and societal perception, and between innocence and guilt. The very ambiguity of Eleanor's actions ensured that each accusation carried weight, yet could never be definitively proven or dismissed. By the time her arrest came, Eleanor Blackwell had become a symbol of multiple anxieties. The fear of female autonomy, the unknown capacities of the human mind, and the limits of rational understanding. Accusations and alleged crimes were entangled with folklore, superstition, and social panic, creating a narrative in which she simultaneously embodied victimhood and threat. Her actions prompted questions about morality, coercion, and influence. Were they crimes in the legal sense, or merely the natural consequence of extraordinary intelligence and insight? And yet, despite extensive documentation, letters, and witness statements, no definitive answer emerged, leaving her legacy suspended between admiration, horror, and skepticism. Eleanor's story during this period demonstrates the fragility of societal categories when confronted with exceptional ability. Her influence highlighted contrasts that would dominate discussions of her trial: fact versus rumor, lawful conduct versus moral panic, intellect versus fear, and female autonomy versus societal control. By examining the accumulation of accusations and the responses they provoked, we see not merely the alleged misdeeds themselves, but the psychological, cultural, and moral mechanisms that shaped Victorian reactions. Eleanor's life and the allegations against her become a lens through which to understand the interplay of perception, power, and societal fear, an interplay that continues to intrigue, unsettle, and haunt modern observers. Even today, the events leading to her arrest provoke debate among historians, psychologists, and criminologists. Were her actions criminal, or simply extraordinary social skill misinterpreted as coercion? Did superstition amplify mundane behaviors into legend? Or was there, in fact, a psychological or neurological phenomenon that endowed Eleanor with abilities that bordered on the uncanny? The ambiguity of these questions, combined with the layered complexity of Victorian social norms and anxieties, ensures that Eleanor Blackwell remains an enduring figure in the study of power, morality, and human perception. Her alleged crimes, rather than providing answers, serve as a mirror reflecting society's deepest fears and curiosities, leaving observers with a chilling, unresolved legacy. Eleanor Blackwell's trial emerged not merely as a legal proceeding, but as a stage upon which the fundamental tensions between reason and belief were played out. In 1897, Victorian London was a city in which scientific rationalism had begun to challenge centuries of superstition, yet the populace still relied heavily on folklore, religious interpretation, and moralistic judgment to navigate the unknown. Eleanor's case struck at the heart of this duality. She was accused of exerting extraordinary influence over others, a phenomenon that left witnesses unsettled and society divided. Physicians, psychologists, and emerging criminologists attempted to measure her effect, cataloging observations with meticulous, if rudimentary, scientific method. Experiments were recorded, interviews conducted, and patterns noted. Could a woman, by mere gaze, suggestion, or presence, compel confessions, induce fear, or guide behavior? While some findings hinted at heightened social intelligence and acute observational skill, no consensus was reached. Contrasting these empirical inquiries were the interpretations offered by occultists, spiritualists, and moral authorities. Clergy and mystics argued that Eleanor's abilities could not be explained by human reason alone. Some suggested she was divinely inspired, a woman gifted, or burdened, with insight into human nature that bordered on prophecy. Others whispered of possession, claiming that forces beyond comprehension channeled through her mind and body to manipulate the wills of men and women alike. Street sermons recounted her presence in pulpit tales, warning of her power to corrupt, ensnare, or influence the faithful. Public fascination with these narratives intensified, creating a feedback loop in which the mixture of fear, rumor, and anecdotal observation magnified her influence. Each interpretation, scientific or mystical, fed the other, ensuring that Eleanor's presence was never neutral, but always charged with tension. The courtroom itself became a theater of contrasting epistemologies. Judges, jurors, and legal counsel were caught between tangible evidence, which often appeared ambiguous or circumstantial, and the testimonies of witnesses swearing to unexplainable phenomena. Some jurors admitted feeling compelled to concede to her reasoning or charm, though whether this was genuine influence or projection of social expectation remained unresolved. Physicians entered affidavits detailing physiological examinations, noting Eleanor's extraordinary cognitive acuity, her quick perceptual responses, and her keen ability to read subtle social cues. They argued that her apparent powers could be explained through heightened observation, psychological insight, and social intelligence rather than supernatural agency. Yet these rational analyses were frequently overshadowed in public discourse by stories of uncanny prescience, strangers who confessed secrets under her gaze, testimonies of judges and counsel inexplicably swayed, and accounts of behavior that appeared to defy natural explanation. Psychologists of the era, working at the forefront of the emerging discipline, framed Eleanor's abilities as a combination of innate aptitude and learned skill. They suggested that she may have possessed a rare neurological configuration that amplified empathy, perception, and cognitive control, allowing her to anticipate reactions and subtly influence behavior. Some proposed that heightened observation and social intelligence enabled her to read intentions and manipulate outcomes in ways that seemed magical to those unfamiliar with human psychology. In contrast, moralists and spiritual interpreters resisted such rationalization, insisting that no human alone could wield such influence. By framing her as possessed, divinely sanctioned, or touched by occult knowledge, they provided society with an explanatory model that satisfied fear, reinforced gendered morality, and preserved the illusion of cosmic order. The press, ever eager for sensationalism, amplified the clash between science and superstition. Newspapers published contrasting reports. Some headlined her as a criminal mastermind whose intellect bordered on the unnatural, others as a witch-like figure whose gaze terrified the city. Stories frequently included eyewitness accounts claiming she revealed hidden truths, foretold outcomes, or manipulated behavior beyond plausible human capability. Simultaneously, editorials ran by physicians and rationalists attempted to demystify her influence, emphasizing empirical study, observation, and reason. The result was a society-wide debate where headlines, public opinion, and scientific reports collided, leaving Eleanor simultaneously admired, feared, and misunderstood. Conflicting accounts of her influence extended beyond anecdotal testimony. Witnesses described her ability to sway jurors, influence courtroom decisions, and compel compliance from individuals of varying social rank. Some jurors admitted feeling a compulsion to agree with her reasoning, though whether this was psychological manipulation, social conformity, or self-deception remains unclear. Physicians attempted to conduct observational experiments, noting her acute focus, ability to maintain attention, and subtle cues in posture, speech, and gesture that could affect perception. Yet these investigations failed to satisfy public curiosity, as they could not fully account for the subjective experiences of fear, awe, and fascination reported by countless witnesses. The interplay between empirical observation and mystical speculation also illuminated Victorian society's anxieties regarding gender and power. Eleanor, a woman navigating spaces dominated by men, challenged norms of obedience, propriety, and intellectual hierarchy. Her apparent influence over others, interpreted either as extraordinary intelligence or supernatural ability, provoked moral panic. A fear that traditional social structures could be destabilized by a woman whose talents exceeded conventional understanding. Scientists attempted to rationalize her capabilities, emphasizing learned skill and cognitive acuity, while spiritualists framed her as an agent of divine or diabolical power. In both cases, Eleanor became a vessel onto which society projected its fears and fascinations, embodying the unresolved tension between control, morality, and human perception. Even today, Eleanor Blackwell's trial demonstrates how human behavior is interpreted through competing epistemologies. The uncertainty surrounding her abilities highlights the interplay between observation and belief, reason and myth, rationality and fear. By examining her story, we see how society responds to extraordinary human capacity, the allure of the inexplicable, and the moral anxieties provoked by power that resists categorization. Eleanor's trial was not merely legal. It was a crucible in which science, superstition, morality, and societal expectation collided, leaving a legacy of fascination, debate, and chilling ambiguity. Her influence, whether natural, learned, or supernatural, remained unresolved, ensuring that discussions of her life and abilities endure as a testament to the complex dynamics between knowledge, fear, and belief. The courtroom buzzed with tension each time a witness approached the stand, for Eleanor Blackwell's presence itself seemed to alter perception. Those called to testify vacillated between admiration and fear, often contradicting one another, their accounts infused with both wonder and dread. Friends described a woman of extraordinary intellect and subtle charm, capable of unraveling complex social situations with a precision that astounded even the most observant. Rivals, by contrast, painted Eleanor as a manipulative force, capable of bending wills, extracting secrets, and creating chaos through seemingly effortless psychological influence. Even strangers, who had no direct ties to her, spoke of an aura that commanded attention, unnerving anyone who dared meet her gaze. This juxtaposition of perspectives highlighted the central tension of her trial. Was Eleanor an extraordinary human being, exercising rare social and cognitive skill? Or was she something beyond comprehension, a figure onto whom society projected its fears and insecurities? The contradictions in the testimonies were remarkable. A neighbor's diary, later submitted as evidence, recounted evenings spent in Eleanor's company, noting her kindness, wit, and attentiveness to the downtrodden. Yet other entries, written in private moments, hinted at unease. The diarist described the discomfort of feeling subtly manipulated, as if thoughts and emotions had been exposed without consent. Letters from associates reveal similar dualities, compliments laced with suspicion, gratitude shaded with fear. Even official transcripts of courtroom statements reflect the inconsistencies of human perception. Witnesses swore under oath that Eleanor had compelled them to reveal information they never intended to disclose, yet in moments removed from her presence, they acknowledged that no physical coercion occurred. The interplay between fear, fascination, and uncertainty became a defining characteristic of the testimonies. This tension was heightened by Eleanor's ability to maintain composure and subtle control over her interactions. Observers frequently remarked upon her calm demeanor, her measured speech, and the precision with which she responded to questions, as though anticipating the thoughts of others before they were verbalized. In a society still governed by rigid hierarchies, her intellect and poise unsettled many, challenging established norms of gender, class, and authority. The very act of speaking about her became a negotiation between truth and self-preservation. Witnesses feared that acknowledging her abilities too openly could make them appear credulous or vulnerable. Denying them entirely risked angering jurors, judges, or the public. Thus, the testimonies themselves became a reflection not only of Eleanor's enigmatic influence, but of the social pressures and moral anxieties of Victorian England. A critical component of these accounts involved the perceptions of men versus women. Male witnesses frequently emphasized the unsettling nature of Eleanor's intelligence, describing feelings of being psychologically outmaneuvered or morally unsettled by her insights. Some claimed that she had, with subtle prompting, induced confessions or guided behavior contrary to their intentions. Female witnesses, conversely, often highlighted admiration for her capabilities while acknowledging fear of social consequences, particularly for women navigating the limited avenues of autonomy available at the time. This gendered dichotomy illustrates how social context and cultural expectations shaped interpretations of her behavior. The courtroom, therefore, became not merely a space for legal argument, but a mirror reflecting the broader anxieties of society, particularly regarding power, influence, and deviation from prescribed roles. Observers also debated the reliability of memory and perception in these testimonies. Psychologists later analyzing the case suggested that Eleanor's influence may have been amplified by the human tendency to project moral and social fears onto enigmatic individuals. Stress, public scrutiny, and the high stakes of a legal trial likely intensified subjective experience, causing witnesses to attribute effects to Eleanor that may have had alternative explanations. Reports of fear, compulsion, and revelation of secrets may have been influenced by collective expectation, suggestion, or social conformity. Yet, the consistency of certain experiences, multiple individuals reporting similar sensations of unease or persuasion, complicates the narrative, leaving historians and psychologists to ponder the boundaries between perception, projection, and actual influence. The contrast between public accounts and private reflections further heightened the mystique surrounding Eleanor. Newspaper coverage sensationalized events, emphasizing coercion, manipulation, and moral transgression. Headlines depicted her as a woman who wielded unprecedented psychological power, often drawing moralistic and gendered conclusions. Diaries and letters, however, reveal a subtler reality. Eleanor's interactions were nuanced, context-dependent, and often marked by empathy and social intelligence rather than overt coercion. This divergence between public perception and private experience underscores a central theme of her trial: the difficulty of disentangling objective observation from subjective interpretation, particularly in the presence of fear, admiration, or societal bias. Testimonies also illuminated the role of memory and suggestibility. Witnesses frequently revised statements, influenced by courtroom discourse, public opinion, or conversations with others. The malleability of recollection amplified contradictions, leaving jurors and observers struggling to construct a coherent narrative. The trial became as much a study of human cognition as a legal proceeding, illustrating how fear, fascination, and social expectation shape interpretation. Eleanor herself rarely offered direct testimony, yet her presence in the courtroom exerted an undeniable influence, causing some witnesses to alter tone, phrasing, or emphasis in ways suggestive of subtle persuasion. This interplay between observation, projection, and influence solidified her reputation as both extraordinary and morally ambiguous. Diaries, letters, and court records further reveal Eleanor's awareness of her own impact. She appeared to understand the power of perception and societal expectation, sometimes amplifying rumors, guiding interpretations, or allowing ambiguity to persist. By neither fully confirming nor denying extraordinary claims, she became a living embodiment of the tension between rational explanation and superstition, curiosity and fear. In doing so, Eleanor ensured that her trial would remain a subject of debate, scholarly inquiry, and psychological fascination long after the verdict was rendered. The interplay between objective testimony and subjective interpretation illustrates the human tendency to project moral judgment onto enigmatic figures. Observers wrestled with their own fears, social biases, and preconceptions while attempting to describe Eleanor's actions. Every statement, diary entry, or letter reflected not only her influence, but also the anxieties of the speaker. Concerns about gender, morality, and social hierarchy intertwined with the mysterious qualities she displayed. This intersection of perception and reality made Eleanor simultaneously comprehensible and unfathomable, admired and feared, innocent and potentially malevolent. Ultimately, the witnesses' accounts transformed Eleanor's trial into more than a legal proceeding. It became a psychological theater, a study in the limits of perception, and a mirror reflecting societal tensions. The contradictions, ambiguities, and moral judgments embedded in these testimonies contributed to a lasting enigma, ensuring that Eleanor Blackwell would remain an enduring figure of fascination, debate, and haunting intrigue. Her story demonstrates how perception, social context, and moral imagination converge, leaving questions about power, agency, and human behavior unresolved. Eleanor Blackwell's life and trial have left an indelible mark on history, psychology, and cultural imagination. Even over a century later, scholars, historians, psychologists, and occultists continue to debate the nature of her influence, the extent of her abilities, and the societal reactions that elevated her from a singular figure to a legend. Some argue that Eleanor was a master manipulator, a woman of extraordinary social intelligence who understood the intricacies of human behavior and exploited them with calculated precision. She allegedly anticipated desires, fears, and moral weaknesses in those around her, bending decisions subtly but profoundly. Observers described the almost imperceptible guidance she seemed to exert, a combination of charisma, timing, and insight that left individuals convinced of her uncanny abilities. To many, these accounts exemplify the power of psychological manipulation in an era unprepared for female autonomy and influence. Historians focusing on societal context argue that Eleanor's abilities were exaggerated by fear and cultural prejudice. Victorian London, a society governed by rigid gender norms and hierarchical social expectations, found itself confronted with a woman whose intelligence, charm, and decisiveness unsettled conventions. Her actions, interpreted through the lens of social anxiety, were magnified into tales of moral transgression and preternatural power. Letters and diaries reveal that contemporaries struggled to reconcile admiration for her intellect with suspicion of her intentions, creating a duality of perception. Eleanor as a brilliant, strategic individual versus Eleanor as a dangerous anomaly. This dichotomy illustrates the broader struggle between recognizing talent and projecting societal fears onto those who defy norms, especially women exercising influence in male-dominated spheres. Psychologists examining Eleanor's case consider her an early example of charismatic authority and persuasion. Modern frameworks describe traits she allegedly exhibited: acute observation, emotional intelligence, and the capacity to influence behavior without physical coercion, as markers of social acuity rather than supernatural intervention. Scholars suggest that Eleanor may have been acutely attuned to micro-expressions, verbal cues, and behavioral patterns, allowing her to anticipate decisions and reactions with remarkable accuracy. In this context, the testimonies that described her influence over jurors, witnesses, and associates could reflect natural psychological dynamics amplified by social expectation, confirmation bias, and fear of deviation from accepted norms. Her case becomes a study in how perception can exaggerate reality, especially when societal anxiety and moral panic intersect. Occult interpretations add an additional layer to Eleanor's legacy. Some esoteric writers assert that her abilities exceeded normal human cognition, positing connections to mystical or divine forces. Rumors circulated during her trial of secret training, hidden rituals, or occult knowledge, suggesting that Eleanor's skills were enhanced by supernatural insight rather than psychological acumen. These interpretations captured public imagination, feeding folklore and sensationalist reporting. Newspapers depicted her as a woman capable of compelling the will, uncovering hidden truths, or foreseeing moral transgressions, solidifying her image as both alluring and dangerous. The persistence of these stories demonstrates humanity's enduring fascination with the inexplicable and its tendency to seek supernatural explanations when confronted with extraordinary talent. Eleanor's legacy is further complicated by the interplay of rational analysis and mythic interpretation. Academics and psychologists attempt to reconcile her abilities with empirical observation, offering frameworks such as behavioral psychology, social cognition, and moral influence. Meanwhile, storytellers, occultists, and popular culture perpetuate narratives of mystery, charisma, and preternatural power. This duality sustains her presence in public discourse. She is simultaneously a historical figure, a subject of scientific inquiry, and a mythic archetype embodying the tension between knowledge and fear, agency and societal control. Each interpretation satisfies a different audience while leaving her true nature unresolved. The societal reaction to Eleanor Blackwell provides insight into broader patterns of moral panic and gendered fear. Her trial coincided with debates about women's roles, autonomy, and influence. Her ability to assert agency within a restrictive, social structure challenged perceptions of propriety, morality, and intellectual hierarchy. Observers, unable to fully contextualize or contain her influence, projected danger, manipulation, and transgression onto her character. The trial itself became a spectacle of gendered anxiety, social control, and the intersection of law, psychology, and morality. Eleanor's story endures as an illustration of how societal norms shape the interpretation of behavior, especially when confronted with talent or intellect that defies expectation. In popular culture, Eleanor Blackwell has become a symbol of enigmatic influence. She embodies the fear and fascination of the unknown, illustrating how society grapples with individuals who operate beyond conventional understanding. The multiplicity of theories surrounding her, psychological prodigy, manipulator, misunderstood visionary, or vessel of supernatural insight, ensures ongoing debate. Each narrative serves as a reflection not only of Eleanor herself, but of the observer's biases, fears, and projections. She becomes a mirror through which society examines the limits of knowledge, the allure of mystery, and the consequences of moral and social judgment. Ultimately, Eleanor's story highlights the enduring tension between fact and interpretation, agency and societal control, logic and superstition. Her trial, influence, and the testimonies surrounding her life underscore the human impulse to explain the unexplainable, to categorize anomalies, and to navigate fear and fascination simultaneously. She represents the convergence of history, psychology, and legend, where tangible evidence and subjective perception intertwine, leaving questions unresolved. Eleanor Blackwell's legacy is a testament to the power of perception, the persistence of myth, and the enduring intrigue of human behavior that defies easy explanation. Today, historians, psychologists, and enthusiasts continue to examine Eleanor Blackwell, analyzing diaries, transcripts, and reports while speculating on her abilities. Discussions range from empirical investigation into charisma, persuasion, and social dynamics to interpretations steeped in mysticism or folklore. The fascination persists because Eleanor's story challenges boundaries between rationality and imagination, innocence and culpability, and reality and myth. Her case demonstrates that extraordinary individuals can simultaneously inspire, unsettle, and provoke endless inquiry. Eleanor Blackwell remains, over a century later, an enigma whose influence endures not only through historical record, but in the collective imagination, inviting new generations to question, interpret, and debate the nature of human power, intellect, and the unexplainable. Eleanor Blackwell's trial and life remain an enigma, a story that defies simple explanation and continues to captivate historians, psychologists, and the curious alike. She occupies a liminal space between genius and manipulation, innocence and culpability, science and superstition. Victorian society, constrained by rigid social norms and anxious about the boundaries of female autonomy, struggled to interpret her extraordinary abilities. Observers saw a woman capable of influencing others with uncanny precision, reading moods, anticipating decisions, and eliciting confessions. Yet the very same behaviors were interpreted alternately as criminal cunning, supernatural power, or remarkable psychological skill. The contradictions in testimony, diaries, letters, and public accounts only deepen the mystery, leaving the audience and scholars alike questioning what was fact and what was projection, rumor, or moral judgment. Eleanor's story exemplifies the tension between objective observation and subjective interpretation. Witnesses alternately praised her intelligence, feared her influence, and speculated on her intentions. The courtroom became a stage for debates over psychology, morality, and social control, pitting law against perception, science against superstition, and rationality against cultural anxiety. Psychologists now view her as a case study in charisma, persuasion, and social cognition, illustrating how individuals with heightened observational skills can manipulate social environments, intentionally or otherwise. Simultaneously, occultists and storytellers perpetuated the myth of supernatural insight, creating a legend that persists in folklore and popular imagination. The collision of these perspectives ensures that no single explanation can fully capture the complexity of her presence, leaving Eleanor Blackwell suspended in a space between history and myth. The enduring fascination with Eleanor arises not merely from her abilities, but from what she represents. The societal anxiety provoked when norms are challenged, and when a single individual exposes the fragility of collective assumptions. She forces us to confront questions about morality, influence, and perception. Was she a woman unfairly vilified by fear and prejudice? Or did she exploit her intelligence and charisma to manipulate those around her? Perhaps she was both or neither, an extraordinary human whose presence revealed the limits of contemporary understanding. Her legacy challenges the observer, compelling reflection on gender, power, and human psychology, and emphasizing that some mysteries resist closure. Ultimately, Eleanor Blackwell cannot be neatly categorized. She is simultaneously historical figure, psychological case, and mythic archetype. The fascination she inspires endures because she defies certainty, embodying the collision of empirical observation, moral judgment, and cultural storytelling. Her life and trial demonstrate that human curiosity, fear, and imagination are intertwined, often amplifying the extraordinary within ordinary circumstances. Eleanor's story resists simplification, leaving her influence, her abilities, and her motives open to debate, speculation, and interpretation. She is a mirror, reflecting society's anxieties and moral dilemmas, and a challenge to anyone seeking absolute truth. In the end, Eleanor Blackwell remains hauntingly unresolved. Some see brilliance, some deception, some supernatural gift. All recognize a woman whose presence unsettled norms and perceptions alike. Her tale invites each observer to form their own interpretation, to grapple with the interplay of power, psychology, and mystery. And so, over a century later, the question persists, unanswered and provocative. What do you believe about Eleanor Blackwell, the woman science could not explain, whose story continues to captivate and confound generations?